Lisa, the stage is yours.
All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with everybody. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to do an abbreviated version of student-driven differentiation, and I see quite a few familiar faces and names, so I know a few of you have participated in this PD a few times. You could probably do this by now, but it's a little bit different because I added in some remote learning pieces, and we'll go ahead and get started. But really, I want this to be a time to answer questions and give ideas, and especially considering the unknowns of what school is going to look like in a month or so for most of us. If there's anything that you really want to talk about today, we can take that time, and I'm available to you after the hour today if you wanted to discuss anything further or have more questions. So again, just for those of you who don't know me, I did write student-driven differentiation. I blogged quite a bit in the past. I do from time to time now, but I am a practitioner first and foremost. I'm not a researcher. I don't have my doctorate. I was never an administrator. I was a teacher and a coach, and I became passionate about differentiation really because of my own son primarily, but both of my children's school experience. And so I started to become a self-study as a differentiation instructional coach, both on differentiation for social emotional needs as well as academic. And in my first year as a differentiation instructional coach, I came across this meme, which you can go ahead and take a look at this now. And I can't see all of you. It's always harder to do everything on Zoom, and you're all on mute, so I can't even hear if you're chuckling or not. But if past experience serves as evidence for today, it's my guess that either you or someone you know has made a comment or done something similar to this in the past. I know that when I was an ELA teacher, my fellow ELA teacher, and she knows I tell this story, so I'm not betraying her confidence or anything. We used to have walkthroughs, and you would get like a 0, 1, 2, or 3 if you were differentiating in the classroom, and they were super high stress days, and the parking lot was always full of teachers like crying in the afternoon after they got like a 0 or whatever. And my colleague used to copy everything on pink, yellow, and blue paper and divide students up into groups. And so when there was a walkthrough, she always got a 3 for differentiation because it looked like she was differentiating when really it was all the same worksheet. And the rest of us were like, this can't possibly be what it is. There has to be more to it than that. So there's quite a bit of confusion about what differentiation is and what it isn't. And so just to kind of get a feel of where we are as a group, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a second so I can see you. If you're comfortable putting your camera on just for a minute, great. If not, we'll just do it with the people that are. There's just a quick fist to 5. So if you have struggled to find effective ways to differentiate for your students, or if you're an administrator for your teachers in the past, hold up a fist. Doesn't mean that you don't want to, just means you haven't really found any effective, sustainable strategies. And if you have found ways, you're going to hold up a 5. The caveat for the finding ways is also that you can't be going home every night and spending hours and hours and hours planning, because that's not sustainable over time. So effective is effective for our students, but also effective for you as practitioners. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen for a minute. Again, if you're comfortable turning on your camera, please do. If not, that's okay. Hold up, fist to 5. How do you feel about differentiating? See a lot of 3s, a couple 2s. Anybody interested in comfortable sharing why you gave the number that you did?
Hey, Lisa, we've also got some that have come in through the chat. We got 4 4s and a 3.
Awesome.
I'll speak for my 3. That's okay. It's not that I haven't. My knocking down my number to a 3 is more about the the long termness of it. I do a lot of planning at home and a lot of attempts to make sure to meet all students, and it is very, I don't want to say draining, but not draining. So I might have said a 4, but based on your comment of the doing this the same way for those 17 years or 20 years, it's just not realistic.
What do you teach, Jen?
High school social studies.
Okay. Anybody else want to share?
I'll share. I come up with a lot of ideas for them. I've had a lot of students who are new to me and districts that have been new to me, so it makes it a little bit more challenging. You know, which ideas to use first, and also sometimes implementation, because depending upon some of the educators I've worked with in different districts, you know, some are very helpful and will try anything, and other people would basically tell me, oh, we tried that already, but wouldn't try it again or try it in a little different way. So.
And are you an administrator, Elizabeth?
No, I went to school later. So I'm 53. I got my degree about 10, 12 years ago. But because I'm older, I've bounced around a little bit. It's a little harder for me to get in somewhere. So I'm actually out of work because of COVID and hoping to start on August 10th. So I have no idea what is going to happen.
Right.
My last day at my last school was the day the governor announced the grounding that he did. So,
yeah, and I think that what you said, starting a new position, or for our students starting a new school, new grade level, is especially stressful at this time with all of those unknowns. So again, I tried to add in a few strategies that we can try out that will work in person or remotely. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again with all of you. So normally I would have everybody just, you know, break apart and do this with a partner. If we were in person, you would sit side by side. I'm not going to take the time, because we have, you know, such a short amount of time together today, to have you do this individually. I'm just going to ask you on your screen to take a look at these different criteria. If you happen to have paper in front of you, you can go ahead and jot some notes down. But these are some criteria that either describe differentiation or do not describe differentiation. And some of them, it really just depends on what your understanding of that criteria is. So this is more for us to just have a little bit of dialogue about what differentiation is and what it is not, so that as we move forward, we're operating with as similar of a definition of differentiation as possible. So I'll give you about 90 seconds to look that over. So you can go ahead and continue looking at those characteristics. I'm going to advance to the next slide, which has answers. They're not necessarily the right answers. They are the answers that I indicate when I hear these different criteria. If you have a different idea in your mind, it does not mean that you have the wrong answer. It means that we probably have a different understanding of what the criteria is, which is part of what leads to that confusion about differentiation. So go ahead and take a look at the markers that I put. And then if you have a question about something, even if you have the same indicator, this is a time that we can talk about it. You can either unmute yourself and just ask your question, or if you want to put it in the chat. And then Jason, if you could tell me what's in the chat. It's super hard to like be a pilot, as I'm sure all of you know from our remote learning, to like share screens, advance slides, check the chat, look at the camera. So any thoughts or questions? So wait time is my goal. I make this joke all the time. I used to think it was really funny. Like in person, I would be like, wait time is my goal. And I'll stand here. It's still my goal on Zoom. It's just 1,000 times more uncomfortable to practice wait time on Zoom, but I'm trying. So if you're uncomfortable, I am too. It's all good.
I really like number 10. That seems to me to be a really, if you can hit number 10, differentiation, you've really excelled in that category. And that's one I would mark myself on as very low, in regards to letting the students in many ways assess their own grading. Not that I don't want to, but haven't learned the skills yet. And there's a teacher on here who's watching this. He's too shy, I won't call his name out, but he does that with his students at our school. And so I know I've seen it done in my building, and I know that it's a really cool tool. It can be done well. So it really kind of sparked my interest seeing that on here.
What does your colleague teach?
Science.
Science.
Yeah.
So I have, and I didn't share them all today, but if you want, I have tools for all of the content areas for high school, middle, and elementary that you can look at as like starting points. I have some examples in the presentation too. Social studies is always a trickier one, especially in the high school, because it depends on what your curriculum looks like and if you're aligned to the new standards or not. But if that's something that you want to try, not only will it help the students, but it will make your planning significantly less detailed.
I'd love to see some of them.
Yeah, I'll you know what, I'll add a bunch of them to the folder that Jason already shared by the end of the day, and then you can look at them in there.
Can you explain your answer to number 13?
Sure, and I'm glad you asked about that. That's a question that I get a lot. So accommodations and modifications, there's several misconceptions with differentiation, and one of the misconceptions is that differentiation waters down the curriculum or makes things easier for students, which could not be further from the truth. What differentiation does is during the learning process, it scaffolds or enriches so that students are being challenged at the appropriate level, with the ultimate goal of every student meeting that grade level standard or skill by the end of that unit of study. And so I talked about learning intentions and success criteria earlier today. We never eliminate learning intentions or success criteria for students when we are differentiating. When it comes to accommodations and modifications, sometimes those can be parts of differentiation. Accommodations most certainly are part of differentiation, because accommodations typically also do not impact the learning intentions or success criteria. So if a student struggles with fine motor skills and they can't write, and we provide them some type of computer or device in order to get their thoughts out, that's an accommodation that does not implicate the learning intentions or success criteria. A modification, depending on what it is, if it lessens the expectations for learning or makes the success criteria less rigorous, that no longer is differentiation. Which is why it's sometimes attached to an IEP. There's an understanding that students with an IEP are not necessarily performing at grade level. So we don't want to modify for students forever. We want to modify for students as needed until they can start to perform with less modifications. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I just want to say that's a great point, because I've seen just when I taught health, and I get SPED students come in and they always want to automatically modify everything rather than letting kids try first and see what they're capable of, because it depends on the subject, depends on the teacher. There's so many variables that go into it. And if you don't let the kid try, you're already putting them in a cycle of a mindset that they're not good enough, and it's damaging to a kid, and you really need to let kids try. So what if they fail? That's part of learning. We all do that. So great point.
Sure. And the thing is, I'm very passionate about this topic. I could talk about it all day, but a lot of times the modifications that we offer for students are not even appropriate for the learning intentions and success criteria. So we say, like, on a multiple choice test, students will have, less choices or they'll have less questions. But sometimes that assessment type is not even the type that should be used for those different learning intentions and success criteria. So I was working with a district recently, just their K-2 teachers, just really focusing on those early foundational skills in both reading and math. And by the end of the day, what we kept realizing is if we are differentiating the right way along the way in K-2 and then continuing on, we should see less students qualifying for interventions, less students being recommended for special education. So it's really, the idea is we are differentiating so that students are meeting the grade level expectations. On that note, I will move into the 4 different categories of differentiation.
Hey, Lisa, real quick before you go on,
Sure.
there was a comment here that just talked about that it's difficult, right, to differentiate on all those levels, right? Particularly when you have students, say late elementary, 4th through 8th graders in an alternative school setting. So I don't know, Lisa, if you just wanted to comment on that.
Yes. So I realized, as I said, if we're doing our job right in K2, we'll have less students. And I advertised a session for middle and high school teachers. So you're like, okay, great. So in like however many years, maybe we'll have students that are. So really, I can't for some reason see the comment section right now, but I would like to say that there is like some magic wand that you can like wave, and if you have students in 4th through 12th grade that are significantly behind, we can bring them up to grade level. Sometimes we can, it depends on where the deficits are, but really at a certain point what we have to do is we have to stop trying to get students up to where they should be this year and figure out where those gaps are from the past and fill those in. And that really comes from having this really strong vertical alignment of your learning intentions and success criteria. Okay, you're in 4th grade, you should be multiplying, I'm making this up because I can't remember right now, triple digit numbers, but you don't know how to multiply a single digit. We need to go back. I always say that, data is such a tricky word in education, and we also sometimes look at education as like, oh, they'll get that next year, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. But I always think of what if education was a swimming pool and we said day 1, everyone's getting in the shallow end and you're gonna, blow bubbles, kick your feet, whatever it is. And then eventually we want you swimming laps in the deep end. The way we run swimming lessons is you move on to each skill as you learn it. We would never take a student and say, by next year, when you're in 1st grade, you're swimming in the deep end, even if you didn't do any of the skills in kindergarten. And so we would see a student in a swimming pool suffering, drowning, needing help, and we would rescue them. But in education, we tend to just keep moving students along from grade level to grade level. And I'm not at all suggesting that we hold students back. I don't think that's the answer at all. What I'm saying is, similar to what I said in the keynote, like stop and recognize what's really happening. What do these students need to learn and how am I going to fill this in regardless of what grade level they're in? Where are they in their progression of skills? Was there another comment too in the chat, Jason?
No, that was it. Just had some people agreeing with what you were saying.
Well, okay. So there are 4 areas in which you can differentiate. You may be familiar with these. They've been around for a while. Carolyn Tomlinson coined these 4 categories 40-something years ago. There is content, which is what students learn, or adults, what we learn. The process, how we acquire that learning, that information. The product, how we demonstrate learning. And then the learning environment, which is where and with whom students learn. And that's everything from the actual physical learning environment to the social emotional pieces, the metacognitive pieces, basically everything else that's not content, process, or product. These 4 categories work simultaneously, they're intertwined. This was another area that when it came out, a lot of school districts said, okay, differentiation, still do. Differentiation is our initiative, that's our goal this year. And here are 4 categories in which you can differentiate, pick one. And then it never worked. And then there were all these like failed, you know, rollouts of differentiation. And the reason for that is twofold. So differentiation is not a goal. Differentiation is a result. So differentiation occurs when we are taking notice of what our students need and doing something to fill that need. Whatever it is that we do, whatever strategy we choose or intervention we give or whatever it is, will fall into one of these categories. So whatever it is that we do will be part of the process or part of the product. And it's much less about knowing which category it is and much more about focusing on what student need is. So we always start with, what do our students need? How do I know? And what am I going to do? And the what are you going to do will fall into these categories. If you are ever told, like, pick one of these categories to differentiate in before you are with your students, that question is very difficult to answer. You can speculate, well, if I have students that need this, but a lot of times that happens in like evaluation cycles. Like, you go in for your pre-observation, what's your lesson, how are you going to differentiate for students? You have to make guesses because you may or may not have that data, that piece that's super important to make those decisions. So within each category, there's certain things that we want to keep in mind. And then I want to show you just some examples of things that you can do within each category. So when it comes to the learning environment, we often think of, and there's quite a bit of talk about this now, distancing desks, 6 feet apart, or are the teachers going to travel? Are the students going to travel? We are very, very literal about the learning environment. But the most important thing about the learning environment is actually relationships. So relationships always come first. First and foremost, anything else you try to do in your classroom without that solid foundation, you will struggle, or your students will struggle to really reap the rewards of all of the great planning and things that you do. So I always find it interesting. In 2016, the Quaglia Institute did a survey of 34,000 4th through 12th grade students, and they asked them, do you have respectful relationships, mutually respectful relationships with your students? They asked teachers, and the teachers said, yes, 99% of them, we have mutually respectful relationships with our students. Then the researchers surveyed the students themselves and said, do you have mutually respectful relationships with your teachers? And 42% of the students said no, which is not to say that the teachers were misleading in their responses, but there was a very big difference in what students and teachers thought of as respectful relationships. I'm not going to go into great detail about all of that research. A lot of it I covered in my keynote, not in such an explicit way, but really it comes down to 3 main parts. If you're interested in this, I'm happy to talk to you more about it after this hour, or I can send you some additional information. But it's being real, being consistent, and communicating, being a listener specifically. The second area we can differentiate in is content. And the content is, again, what it is that students learn. So years and years and years and years of education has been spent where teachers impart knowledge, students memorize that knowledge, they take a test is over, and then all of that factual information leaves their heads. And there's been a battle with, can students use Google? Can they not use Google? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we should just stop talking about all of the actual individual pieces of content and talk about when the idea of memorization, which is really what we're talking about, we're afraid of with Google, like the kids won't learn these facts if they just go to Google, what memorization really is and when it's important. So I will say memorization is hugely important for students, for humans, for all of us to function efficiently in life. That's why we want to know what 2 + 2 is. We've memorized that's 4. We are no longer counting, most of us. If you get me like 2-digit numbers, I will still use my fingers. But single-digit numbers, we memorize those. When memorization is important is not at the beginning phase of learning. It's at the end when we've had lots of exposure, something called spaced practice. So over time, constant exposure to information or practice with skills will naturally lead to memorization. So Chad, you're a social studies teacher, that's a content area. There's a lot of facts that are to be memorized. Those facts are actually more likely to be memorized when we start with the higher level questions. Which side of this war had a, more significant cause, or whatever you want to, ask the students? Provide them with the facts, or just say, go to Google, find all of these facts, and then constantly have the students reference those facts rather than regurgitate information on an exam right away. Any questions about space practice? Okay, I'm just skipping a little bit ahead. So when it comes to the learning environment, which I just went over, I wanted to give you some strategies for things to focus on in the classroom, like of course in person, but if we're at home, things that we want to make sure that we focus on. So for the learning environment, if we have any type of remote learning, the most important piece is to have that face time with your students in two different ways. So you want to have the classroom community building, which is typically like a whole class or a larger small group, but you also want to have face time with students to do direct instruction of the academics. That does not have to be with your whole class at once. It's something that we're not all that used to, but it's super important to use small group instruction as much as possible and know what those different pieces are, which comes down to the process. So knowing what the process is that you are going to do with students is the most important piece. So the process, sorry, I'm skipping all around, is how students acquire learning, and that comes down to, again, to the learning intentions and the success criteria. So I want to show you an example of what this looks like. This was also in the keynote this morning, but I have a full example. This is 7th grade math. In order to differentiate that process and have those small groups of instruction, there's a lot of font in here to fit it in, or a lot of text rather. We start with the standard. We identify those different learning intentions. So each of these different learning intentions is something that we teach individually. And then for each learning intention, there are several success criteria. So for the first learning intention, these are the 3 items that students need to show. The second, the third, etc. When we are determining who's going to be in our small groups and what our pacing is going to look like, if I was doing small groups, and I'll show you some examples of what this looks like, I would have all of my students who are still working on learning intention number 1 work with me for additional practice. Group 2, group 3, group 4. For students who have all of these, I would still meet with them in a small group, but I would be focusing on some type of enrichment opportunity or extension, going further in what the students are doing. The same rules apply in the classroom. I actually think there's an advantage of not being in the classroom to do this, because you can schedule your times for your small groups. Your other students can be working asynchronously, and you don't have to manage the logistics of that. You are on your own, or they are on their own to do that work, and they meet with you at a later time. Any questions on the learning intentions and success criteria? So I want to show you some examples of things that you can do content-wise to differentiate, again, for remote learning. We only have a little bit of time left before our session ends. So go ahead and take a look at this. My dog is barking outside my door, even though my kids are on dog duty. They're not going to be happy with me in minutes. I just have to let her in, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and take a look at that. If you have any comments or questions you wanted to mention, you can feel free to chat those in. I don't see anything that hasn't been addressed yet on chat. So if you have anything to chat in here, please do so, or please come off mute. And
sorry. Okay, so when it comes to content, it's, if you think of the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I'm dating myself now, some of you may be too young to have ever seen that, but if you think of that classroom in the high school where it's Bueller, and the kids are, half of them are sleeping, some of them aren't there, no one knows the answers. It's really just a play on this whole engagement piece, and something that I recommend. I have 8 steps with differentiation, but the first is the clear learning intentions. The second is hooking the students. So engagement is part the activity that is planned, but also the relevancy of the content. So the students don't have to like the content per se, but they have to understand the relevancy, or at least see how it could apply to their lives. When it comes to remote learning, I think we have to do everything in our power to make things as engaging as possible. Becky, I'm like looking at you. Becky's a coach that I work with all the time. Becky is homeschooling her nieces and nephews this summer, and like does the most engaging activities about all of the different learning that they're doing, which could be rather dry, but what can we do to like spice things up? So I just have a few pointers, right? These are examples, but these are not like ideas you should take. Just one, everything around you look at as a learning opportunity. Everything you see that you find interesting, stop and ask yourself, why do I find this interesting? Would my students? So I remember back in like March, April, when we shut down, I saw this tweet and I like looked at it and I knew it had something to do with math. And I knew people were laughing and it's getting all these likes, but I did not know exactly what that was. So I texted it to my friend who was a math teacher. And I said, Mike, I think this has something to do with math. What is this? And he wrote back and he said, it's the Pythagorean theorem. It's a play on that. Like, it's wrong. Now, I didn't know it was wrong, probably because I didn't have a lot of space to practice with Pythagorean theorem when I was in high school. And I didn't even have those basic skills from getting up there. But just posting something where you're getting students to think about it, not looking who's getting it wrong, not looking who's getting it right, just having a conversation. What's wrong with this? How can you make it right? Give students that sticky learning opportunity to help them when you get into that deeper, more abstract content to come back and remember a real life application of that. Additionally, interdisciplinary learning opportunities are super important. I was in a session in the first breakout with some teachers from LaGrange, a team of 8th grade teachers that over remote learning did a whole PBL unit. So all of their teachers used the same set of math and ELA standards. They all shared grades. They did an amazing job of just combining all of the different content and assessing students on the same skills. What I've been hearing a lot from art teachers, PE teachers, music teachers is, how are we supposed to do our jobs? We can't share equipment. We can't, be with all the students at the same time. Music and PE in particular, there's a lot of just additional considerations that are making things super tricky. That's a great place for interdisciplinary learning to come in. So all the rage last spring was on TikTok. Kids were making these sidewalk drawings with masking tape. It's an art opportunity. It's a math opportunity. I don't really know what either of those are because I'm not an art and math teacher, but looking at your own learning intentions and success criteria, how could this activity fit in? What could you use this activity to teach and assess with students? The other thing that I think is super engaging and a great way to start any in-person, but certainly Zoom session, is some type of scavenger hunt. So this, I've seen lots of teachers do this for like morning meetings and just like the SEL bonding type pieces. But if you think of what your standard, your essential standard or critical standard, focus standard, every district has a different term, what your standard is, and then you create a scavenger hunt based on that standard, you can open up the dialogue between students. So if I am a first grade math teacher, in 1 minute, gather as many objects as you can, bring them back to your work area, and then count the number of objects you have. Oh, Jason, how many do you have? 4. John, how many do you have? 3. And I have 2. How many is that all together? So we're just engaging with the things that we have in our homes. Again, this all comes back to when we are planning, what is it that we're trying to teach, instruct, and what does that look like when the students have learned it? Any other, or any thoughts or questions? I know that was a lot of information.
I actually did something similar with my students with autism with a scavenger hunt over summer school last year. We were going to go to Food for Less. So I had actual pictures of the objects on the shelves and icons for different students to be able to find those items. And then we were doing less than, greater than with the prices.
That's awesome. And did the students enjoy that?
Well, we never went to Food for Less because of transportation problems, but we were able to do the scavenger hunt with the real pictures anyway. I had just printed additional and we put them up around. We had this hallway with poles. And so we just put them on different poles in the windows that were near, and the students were able to do that. So we did do it then later in the year as well after the school year started.
That's awesome. So I want to talk just lastly about, I didn't really touch on the last category of differentiation, which is the product. I'm just going back in my slides for a second. So the product is how students show their learning. So not necessarily a project, which we often think about, but what will they produce? And it can be a verbal answer, it can be a written answer, it can be a variety of pieces, but it's not necessarily this whole long, elaborate production that we often tend to think it is. We want to make sure that we focus much less, especially these days, on the actual grade that we're giving students and more on have the students met these different criteria and then give them feedback on those criteria. I cannot stress enough how important giving feedback is. So I'm going to show you two slides on feedback and then show you some ways that students can track their progress. I know there was some interest in that. So feedback has really 7 characteristics that make it effective. I'm going to give you just a minute to read what's on the screen right now. So no matter what level of feedback, which I'm going to talk about next, you give, the feedback should have as many of these characteristics as possible. Any questions or comments or need for clarification on those?
Not seeing any coming through, Lisa, on the chat, just so you know that. I'll keep an eye on it.
Thanks, Jason.
Oh, here we go. Here's some feedback here. The feedback you give a student is so powerful. It also opens up a dialogue into where the student is at in their learning journey.
Absolutely. And the feedback piece is really, we overlook how important it is to differentiate the type of feedback that we give. In part, I think we don't always know that there are different types of feedback or that different types are appropriate at different times. There's technically 4 levels, but just going to combine the 3rd and 4th into one, types of feedback that we can give students as they're learning or anyone as they are learning, and they are appropriate to give at certain times. So task-related feedback, which is right, wrong, yes, no. It's a multiple choice test. It's just yes, no, right, wrong, open, close. That's it. That is extremely important for all students to get at the very beginning of when they're tackling a new skill. Once the students have the basic understanding of what the new concept is, it is no longer appropriate because it does not propel the students further. It's a closed door. It's that right, wrong, yes, no, which again is why if we give just a quiz with you got 4 out of 6, but we don't give the feedback as to why, it's not necessarily going to propel the student any further. The next level is the process level of feedback, which is, what step did you skip? Why do you think that this answer is incorrect? Opening up that dialogue, as the person who wrote in the chat said. Extraordinarily important, and most of our students should be in the process level of receiving feedback by the middle of a unit of study. What research has found is that 94% of feedback that all teachers give to all students at any point in their learning throughout the entire school year is task related. So almost all the feedback that we give and that our students receive does not propel them further. Once our students are really confident, or perhaps they've even shown mastery according to the success criteria, the next level is the self-regulation level of feedback, personal evaluation, where students are so well versed in what they are studying that they can provide themselves feedback. So if you think about something that you do that you are good at or that you enjoy doing, gardening. If you are gardening and you start to plant something in one area and you recognize that the sun doesn't shine in that area and you move where you're planting, that's an example of self-regulation feedback. You're so familiar with the content that you can provide yourself feedback on its own. So how do we take these students further? We give them questions to prompt them to go further in their thinking. Well, what if that's the only area you have to plant a garden? You don't have a sunny area and you really want a garden. How can you have a garden there? What would you do? So prompting the students to go further, otherwise known as extensions. The reason why this is so important is because we often think when we're dividing students up into small groups that we should meet with students for the same number of minutes, same number of times per week, which is not true. We need to meet with students every week as often as possible, but how frequently and the duration of those meetings is going to change based on where students are, what type of feedback they need. If students are still in this task level and they're just learning to understand what the learning goal is, they need to meet with their teacher every day, if not multiple times a day, depending on the age, to get constant feedback. When students are at this level, they don't need feedback. In fact, it's detrimental to give students too much feedback at this point because it stunts their curiosity and their growth. So perhaps you're meeting with students in this group every day for 10 minutes, but you're only meeting with students in this group twice a week for 15, 20 minutes each. That's appropriate. So it's about the quality of the small groups rather than the quantity or making everything equal. So I know that was a lot of information in 45 minutes, and we have about 10 minutes left that I want to just keep open for questions or comments or whatever it is that you need. I'm going to put up one of the, this is a second grade example, but you can apply this to any, maybe take out the emojis, but a way that students can track their own progress with success criteria. And again, I'll add those to the folder. Our last 10 minutes is for you to ask questions of me or any of the other participants or Jason.
Just so you folks know, Lisa's materials are here in the shared Google folder, and I know Lisa just said she was going to share a couple of other, or at least one other document with me so that I can upload that into the shared Google folder.
Jason, if I put it in the link the folder that I shared with you yesterday, it will just be in there, right?
I will go back in there, Lisa, and then pull that into the shared, because I didn't pull your entire folder into the other shared folder, if that makes sense. So yeah, but yes, I can do it.
Yeah. Perfect. So any questions or comments? Here's another example.
I like the last one that you had up, and you don't have to switch it back with I can do this task or I need help. It's very similar actually to Universal Learning System, what they do in the transition area with their job surveys. So again, if they're not seeing that kind of a questioning earlier on, when they get to, like my students, when they get to the transition, they're not going to understand that process. But if they're getting even in small steps in other subject areas, that skill will transfer over even to fill out those kind of surveys.
For sure. In like practical purposes, this one of the presenters who was in a session earlier, if you went to the primary learning or primary instructional strategies, this came from her class. But what she does is she still has students go through all the same different centers for teachers that are interested in station rotation. So everybody works with teacher, works by themselves, plays games, goes on their computer program, but the skill that the students are working on in each of the groups is where they're at in that learning progression of the skills. And I have other examples at other grade levels and content areas too, if you'd like to see what it looks like at, you know, at an 8th grade level.
I like that a lot, Lisa. Does that, is that something then that she would put up in the classroom, or that she would, so does she put it up on the whiteboard so that way kids know exactly what it is everybody's working on, or?
Yes, so she has that up all the time. And then for remote, she'll have something like that. The colors indicate she has just a bunch of folders that are the color of the group, so the students always know what they're looking for. So yeah, she has that all the time. And the most important thing about this, these groups are flexible. So you're only in group 1 until you master that skill. Then you go to group 2. It's not like you're in that group for the whole unit, which is, again, that would be tracking within the classroom. And that's the opposite of differentiation. That's what we want to try to avoid. We want, by the end, everybody is in group 4 or beyond.
Hey, Lisa, one thing that came up earlier during one of the breakout sessions was just the idea of Shannon Ryan and Sarah Weaver from Harvard called them the superhero learning targets, right? So, you know, particularly in a remote learning environment. I don't know if maybe, Lisa, you want to speak to that a little bit, just, you know, with there being, you know, everybody's in a lot of different places for the start of the school year, right? With in person versus remote versus some sort of a combination. Maybe just thoughts that you have, recommendations on the idea of what they called superhero learning targets, right? Like the most important learning targets if you have to go to remote.
So I'd say if you have to go to remote or if you have to go to school, you should have those like superhero, I like that term, learning targets. So it starts with prioritizing the standards. So what are the standards that are the most important, which does not mean that you are ignoring the other standards, but which are the most important that we assess to mastery during this school year, and what does that look like? And then I think, you know, in a high school situation, especially, you have so many different subject areas and you have so many different learning intentions and all of that. Plus, we know that there are students that have significant deficits. If we start piling on, we are without a doubt going to get students who just shut down or tune out. They won't even be able to tend to those pieces, which is why I love, and maybe if you have time, you'll go back, watch LaGrange 106, what they did with their 8th grade. They focused on the ELA and the math. They brought a little bit of science in, but they didn't prioritize the science as a standard to assess to mastery. They just had exposure with that NGSS standard, so that they were really able to focus on that, like claim evidence, reasoning idea in all of their content areas, but with one goal, that it was an interdisciplinary PBL that all of the 8th graders participated in. And it was a really compelling structure that they used and very successful.
And Lisa, which session was that again, just so that people can know if they want to go look at the recording?
I think they were in the first group, and it was something about PBL for remote learning is interdisciplinary. All those words are in the title, I believe. But
yeah,
they have a bunch of tools that you can take and use. They like shared all their templates and everything.
Yeah, that was for LaGrange District 106, using interdisciplinary project-based learning to assess grade level standards.
There you go.
And Lisa, actually the one that I was referring to earlier with Shannon and Sarah from Harvard was during that same breakout session time slot. So theirs was keeping the focus on learning, a high school experience. And they were really talking a lot about differentiation at the high school level, which I know Lisa's been working with the folks in Harvard on.
Well, one of the things that Harvard has done very well and spent a lot of time over the last few years is Harvard uses the term essential standards. And in Highland Park, where I work, we call it focus standards. Some people call it priority standards. We have different terms everywhere. But Harvard has all of those essential standards. So I'm thinking what Shannon and Sarah were talking about is within those standards now, what are our 2 targets that we're going to make the most important, the priorities.
Folks, we've got a few more minutes here left. Other comments, clarifications that you'd like from Lisa regarding the information that she shared with us here during this last session?
You all have my contact info. If you think of any questions when we're not online, feel free to email me and I'll respond to the best of my ability.
And to back that up too, my contact information is on the invitation that you folks all used to register for the conference today. So feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions, or if you guys are talking about as a school team, right, how what your plan's gonna look like for the fall, please reach out if you think that we at Edmentum could be of any service to you and to your team. Again, want to mention to you in the chat, you've got the link to the shared Google folder with all the resources from today. You've also got a link to the Edmentum YouTube channel for Illinois. We'll get all those recordings here up in the next 24 hours. And once again, Lisa, to you, want to thank you for all of your time, energy, and effort today, not only the keynote, but also a breakout session. So thank you to Lisa.
Thank you for having me.
Oh gosh, thank you. And then to everybody here in the session, thank you all so very much for your time and for all that it is that you do for the students and the families and the communities that you serve. So thank you very much and best of luck. Stay healthy and well. And once again, please reach out to us if we can help in any way. Thanks for being with us here today.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure. Yes.
No, I put it in, but I missed it before too. How long will the handouts, or are we able to download them onto our own drives, or how long will we have access to them on that shared drive?
Yeah, Elizabeth, we'll keep them up there forever, right? So I think that you won't have editing rights, but I believe that you can make a copy of those, right? I think it's been a little while, but you should be able to make a copy, Elizabeth, of those, and then you could put those into your own folder. That link for the folder is public, so anyone who has that link should always be able to see those.
Okay, great. So as you were saying before, if we wanted to share them with colleagues or whatever,
Yep.
we were great. Thank you guys so
absolutely,
much.
Elizabeth. Yep, thank you for being with us today. Any other questions? All right, thanks again, everybody, for your time today. Thanks again, Lisa.
Thank you, Jason. Bye,
Take care, everyone. Be well.